Are you unknowingly putting your pet at risk with trendy wellness fads? Are pet health myths or conventional practices costing you a fortune and risking your pet's life? I'm Dr. Alex. I've been a veterinarian since 2006, and if you're watching pet health videos like this one, then I know that you're invested in the well-being of your dog or cat and likely trying to keep up with all of the latest treatments and health optimization trends. But many are based on cult-like beliefs, myths, and disinformation. So today I'm going to walk you through the dangers of pet wellness cults and reveal the 15 telltale signs of cult behaviour. By the end, you're going to know how to spot these red flags and keep both yourself and your pet safe and healthy. You know, we've reached a point where if you're not actively preventing illness, then you're seen as an irresponsible nihilist. It's just no longer acceptable to just address sickness when and if it arises. We're actually expected to be constantly fighting against every potential health risk that could befall you. If not, believe me, you're judged. And the online consensus on pet health has absolutely followed suit. You know, take food, for example. For us humans, it's always been more than just a simple source of nourishment. It's a real source of social as well as moral identity, with people forming group identities and a sense of moral superiority through strict dietary rules. I'm sure you know people, hopefully it's not you, who will talk about their diet choice at any opportunity. Doesn't that sound familiar to the growing discourse about the feeding of our pets? Well, on the face of it, most pet diets are absolutely all about health, but in fact they're just as much about group identity and moral judgment. And in many cases, the exact same dietary philosophies that we elect to follow ourselves, with its associated moral signposting and groupthink, are really being forced upon our pets and forced upon us as pet parents. But for many pet parents, unfortunately, the achievement of absolute health for their furry companion, let alone themselves, over the whole course of their lifetime, it's simply an unattainable goal. You know, sometimes bad things just happen because they always have and they always will. The difference now, though, is that it always has to be somebody's fault. It's always someone's fault. There's always someone to blame. There was something you or someone else did or didn't do that caused the problem or left your pet open to developing that problem. Either that, or it's your vet's fault and greed that they won't treat your pet for the price that you're able to pay rather than the price it actually costs. That's a story for another day. I also just said pet parent. You know, that's a term that it wasn't even ever heard of when I first qualified as a vet, but its current ubiquity, it's everywhere. It's in every single marketing piece for every single item to do with pets. It's a perfect demonstration of the growing danger of being sucked into a pet health cult. The fact is that only a really tiny proportion of society can afford to pour its income into wellness treatments for either themselves or their pet, and the effectiveness of such treatments and preventatives often remains unproven in a great many situations. In the worst case, they have actually been completely disproven to be of any benefit. But try telling that to its followers. Cult, anyone? Pseudoscientific treatments, diet plans and supplements, they can also contribute to false information and a sense of distrust infiltrating social media feeds and just society in general under the guise of health advice. At best, these sow small seeds of doubt in your mind, even if you seemingly completely disregard them. At worst, they can actively harm health, they can waste money, and they can cause suffering both to animals and to owners. Just what is a cult, and am I being a little bit extreme in my language? Well, the definition of a cult is both the great devotion to a person, idea, object, movement, or work, and a religion regarded as unorthodox or spurious. And while there's no way I'm talking about Charles Manson or Jim Jones scale cults, it's actually quite scary how similar to these cult examples some of the messaging about pet food and other pet health practices is by certain groups and individuals. And yes, some of these cults are either completely harmless or advocating for perfectly sound health practices. Others, though, are very different, and here are 15 warning signs to help you spot them before you're sucked in. The treatment, practice or idea has its own name rather than fitting under another more general umbrella term. And I get that things need to be called something, but in many cases the first step in cult-like behaviour is to give its own special name or hijack a known term and change its meaning. Let me know in the comments if there's any particular names that might fit this description. I can think of a few, but for the time being I want to keep things fairly treatment agnostic. Its advocates claim it is the best treatment or practice. You know, treatment plan recommendations, they're hugely individual and based on both patient and owner needs. Health and nutritional needs vary hugely depending on the individual, their breed, their age, their neuter status, their health status, their activity levels, just their general lifestyle. It's very seldom the case that there is a hands down, all out best option available. Although sometimes there is a worst. We're more normally dealing with nuances, with shades of grey, but that doesn't make for simple, effective messaging or sound bites. And so instead, a cult will claim that their option, it's simply the best, with messaging also combined with the demonization of the alternatives with no hint of uncertainty. It demonizes particular treatments, practices, diets or nutrients. Pet food fads follow human feeding fads more and more closely. Let's take grain-free. Grains are the enemy. They're nothing but fillers. They're actually harmful. Problems with particular grain-free diets? Well, that's big pet food's fault. It's nothing to do with the cult driving people to these diets in the first place based on pure disinformation. We get wild claims about particular conventional pharmaceuticals based on nothing more than hearsay and not backed up by any form of meaningful data or evidence. It uses fear to recruit new converts. There's nothing quite like fear to make us take action, and there's nothing quite like a cult for ramping up the level of terror. You know, scary stories are scary, and as humans we are more likely to act on what there is to lose compared to what we could gain. And so this form of messaging can be particularly effective regardless of how true or untrue it may be. Here I'm thinking about exaggerating the potential dangers and downsides of conventional veterinary practices while promoting their own product or method as safer or more natural. We've got sharing emotional testimonials from pet owners who believe their pets suffered severe reactions or even died because of a conventional intervention. And it's hard to ignore these, even when the actual truth is very likely different. Its followers are emotionally attached to it. Look, we all want the best for our pets, and sometimes there may be a struggle to find something that really helps them with whatever challenge they're facing, or at least seems to help. It can be a struggle to find people who just talk your language and seem to just get you. Emotional attachment to a pet health practice, it can lead to really strong beliefs and behaviours, even in the face of questionable evidence. The combination of personal investment, of community support and perceived benefits, it creates a really powerful bond that's difficult to break and may well lead to some of the other cult-like behaviours I'm discussing today. Zero tolerance for criticism or questions or critical inquiry. In a group that advocates a particular way of thinking, you might first think they're all sweetness and light, making you feel really welcome, being super friendly, but then you question a particular practice. You ask for some evidence to back up a claim, suggest all may not be quite as it seems, and the mood quickly changes to one of attack. Unreasonable fears about the outside world that often involve evil conspiracies. Okay, so this is huge in the pet health space. How many alternative treatment providers go on about the average veterinarian being just in it for the money? They don't know anything about a particular subject. They're only interested in keeping patients sick so they have more work. Or they're in cahoots with big pet food or big pharma, promoting certain brands, certain medications that are supposedly unhealthy or overpriced in exchange for some kind of kickback or financial incentive. Strangely enough, the person claiming these things very often has a supplement, a diet, a course or a test to sell you and solve all your problems if you follow their way of thinking. And the hypocrisy of this is seldom commented on. A belief that the leader is the exclusive means of knowing truth or giving validation. With this, I'm talking about the perception of a really charismatic figure whose knowledge and insights are considered infallible. Anyone who suggests any doubt is immediately shut down. We've got followers seldom interact with others outside the immediate group, certainly not those with wildly different opinions. You know, you see that polarization everywhere in society at the moment. Books, articles, interviews and any other media produced by the leader. They're considered the gold standard source of information and held up as irrefutable proof by both followers and the leader themselves. And I had this actually recently. I had someone approach me about trialling a particular home testing kit that they produced. It's not one that I'd come across before. And when I asked about any evidence, when I asked for evidence to support the claims that were being made, and there were some quite wild claims being made, I was pointed to opinion pieces that they had produced themselves and nothing more. A belief that the leader is right at all times. Being the exclusive means of truth is one thing. Being right every single time, in every single situation, on every single topic commented on is quite another. But for cult leaders, this is standard. Enforcing information control. Cults and cult health leaders, they practice deception by either deliberately withholding or distorting information, or even just outright lying. They minimize or discourage access to non-cult sources of information. They also make extensive use of this cult-generated information and propaganda that I've just spoken about. This cult-generated information becomes like a Bible to them. Practice thought control. Cults will require members to internalize a group's doctrine as truth. Everything is black and white. It's framed as good versus evil. They use loaded language and cliches which constrict knowledge, which stop critical thinking and reduce complexities into platitudes and buzzwords. It's not a valid picture, but it's one that's very easy to communicate and simple to understand. Manipulate through emotional control. Cults will make a person feel like problems are always their own fault, or the fault of a once trusted advisor, the vet in many cases. Never the leaders or the group's faults. They instill a fear, such as a fear of the outside world, a fear of these ideological enemies, even a fear of being shunned by the group. Followers feel they are never able to be good enough. Are the goals so lofty as to be unattainable? Any problems experienced framed as being the fault of the follower? A time frame so unrealistic so as to be impossible despite testimonials or evidence to the contrary. Emotional manipulation techniques can make followers feel that their worth and identity are tied to their compliance with a cult's teaching, leading to a perpetual sense of not measuring up. Burden of proof. Another really common cult tactic in the online pet health space especially is to deflect skepticism over their beliefs by placing the burden of proof on others to disprove. But the believer is the one who needs to provide proof instead of sending others into reaction mode. If something's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny, and they should very easily be able to provide you with the evidence to support their claims. They should be used to doing it multiple times. The burden on proof is on whoever is claiming an expertise or a new therapy or a revelation. The common phrase of "go away and do your own research" is really not acceptable and a big red flag. But then if they do provide proof, it's often simply opinion pieces or research that they have authored, and often will fail to disclose any conflict of interest at all. Funnily enough though, when there's a funding from a drug company, for example, for a study, they're quick to shout about that and as a result completely disregard any results. Or they use nothing but testimonials, which are incredibly unreliable and absolutely the worst kind of evidence, if you can even call them evidence at all. Whenever the group or leader is criticised or questioned, it is characterised as persecution. An extreme example of this, and for those of you that follow various online pet health advocates, you may come across vets who have been stripped of their licence or have given up their licence to practice before it was taken from them. Of course, the narrative given is one of persecution, of martyrdom, of being punished for speaking the truth, of being a crusading whistleblower, of truth fighting against a corrupt establishment. And they generally don't stop calling themselves a veterinarian or a doctor either. And while a lot of what I've just spoken about seems pretty extreme, it seems pretty obvious, it's understandable that you think you're never going to be taken in by these cultish tactics, but it's really important to be aware of your own vulnerability. Mind control, effectively, it's a bi-directional process between the predator and the person being targeted. And what plays on one person's fears or vulnerabilities, it won't work on someone else with a different life experience, but there is absolutely something that will work on everyone. If not now, then at a time when you're more vulnerable, when maybe your pet has been hit with a really serious diagnosis, when you're struggling with other things in your life and someone just takes the time to listen and make a few helpful suggestions. And with that in mind, I want to share with you the time that I actually performed a miracle cure, and you'll see just how easy it is to be tricked into being taken advantage of, which you can find out more in this video linked on screen. So check out my miracle in this video. I'll see you there, but until then, I'm veterinarian Dr. Alex. This is Our Pets Health, because they're family.